Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead and get started, please. Leon, our host and organizer, is tied up at work, so with your permission, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Doug Reece, AK4AO, and I joined the club and also got my amateur license for the second time in 2010. I'm a fellow who likes to do new stuff. I was first licensed in 1962, but took a zillion years off for, after a coast-to-coast move, and acquired a girlfriend and a wife and kids and all the usual stuff, right?
All at the same time?
Not all at once, but all in the way of coming back to amateur radio until it got close to retirement in 2010. I like to try new stuff and something different from what I did as a kid. So I ended up getting a flex radio, and I started with PSK31 and then did some JT65 and JT9, and now I'm here to talk to you about FT8, and I do enough the other stuff just to prove that I can. Would it be better if we turned at least the front lights off?
Is that a new favorite,
or? It's becoming a new favorite, not only of myself, but of lots of folks. This was a remarkable week. This is the week before the CQ Worldwide RTTY contest. And I think that the bands were not so good for RTTY, and those guys needed something to do, and I ended up working 4 DX positions on Wednesday afternoon this week, as the bands were not so good for RTTY, but good enough for FT8 apparently. Let's see, some breaking news. In your October QST, which I just received in the mail, there are 2 articles relevant to FT8. One is by the author of the low signal modes, Joe Taylor, and his article in October is the first of a 2-part series. So in October he talks about the different modes that he has in his software called WSJT, and in November he's going to talk some more about what's under the covers and how he does the things that he does to get a reliable signal through under difficult conditions. Okay, another bit of breaking news for anyone interested in FT8. It is part of the WSJT software suite. It is a release candidate, so it's not in the official release, production release, that is, yet. And there is a release candidate 2 that came out, I don't know exactly when, but in the last little while. So if you're on release candidate 1, those of you who are already doing FT8, you might want to go to release candidate 2 from the same website.
What was the software?
We'll get there again. So WSJTX, but we'll talk about it. On the top of the slide here, I'll show you a picture of what FT8 signals look like on the waterfall of my rig. Okay, so if you tune to a well-known frequency, and 7.074 is a well-known dial frequency for this kind of signal, between 074 and 076, you'll find a lot of signals that warble back and forth and switch around every 15 seconds. So that's what FT8 is like, to the casual observer. It is the newest addition to the WSJTX family. The way it works is that stations transmit on alternate 15-second periods, and they transmit mostly standardized messages. So this is not a good mode for chatting. You're limited to about 13 characters in a single transmission. So you're not going to get to know the people you contact, but you may make contacts all over the world. It's similar to JT65 and JT9. Some of you have said you're working those modes, except it's 15-second intervals versus the 1-minute intervals that JT65 and JT9 require. So instead of taking about 6 minutes to complete a QSO, it's more like 1.5 minutes. It's not quite as sensitive as JT65, but recall that there's at least one claim, this is the only published figure that I've seen, which said that JT65 is 25 dB more sensitive than CW. Also in JT, or in FT8, you have the issue that, when you were working JT9 and JT65, you actually transmitted for 50 seconds about, and then you had 10 seconds to decide what to do. Well, if people are transmitting for almost the full 15 seconds in FT8, you've got a little over a second to decide what to do. And that is tough for at least my response time. But the WSJT software has options to automate responding to CQs if you're calling, or to sequence through the standard messages, if you're working somebody. And I'll show you how that works. Okay, what is FT and 8? Well, F is Steve Frank, T is Joe Taylor, the folks who created the mode, and 8 is 8-tone FSK. All right, so it's not a bandwidth. It's not like PSK31. Its occupied bandwidth is about 47 hertz. But still, there's typically a 2K watering hole, and folks are going a little above that, so you can get quite a few QSOs in at 47 hertz per. So it's good for DXing. The faster turnaround, of course, means that the calling station has a chance at completing a lot more QSOs per unit time. And also for poor band conditions and also short openings, if you only have to have it open for a minute and a half, you're a lot better off than if you needed 6 minutes. Also, it already seems to be more popular than JT65 and JT9. I use a flex radio, and I can operate the two side by side. I've been doing some of that, and I haven't seen more signals on JT65 plus JT9 than on FT8 recently. And the last few times I've looked at 80 meters, JT65 and 9 were gone, and there were a bunch of FT8 signals. So it's having really rapid uptake. So these slides are on the website, and they have the link to where you go to get the software. I mentioned that it's still a candidate release, so you've got to scroll past the regular production WSJTX software, and further down on the web page there's the candidate release. Now, if you are going to use a Windows PC, there is something else that's very important, and that is that if you're going to transmit on alternate 15-second intervals, then you need to be in pretty close agreement with the other station about when the 15 seconds starts and ends. Right? And that's done by synchronizing your clock to a time standard, and the built-in Windows time sync program usually isn't good enough. So you typically will have to install any of a few freeware packages, and the instructions for WSJTX explain all that in the section I indicated here. Okay, so the WSJTX software provides two windows for those of you doing JT65 and JT9. These will look familiar. They're almost the same, not quite. Let's see, the top window is a waterfall. It's hard to see from where you are, but there's actually two things going on. This top part that has all the green lines is scrolling down over time, and the colors indicate the presence and the strength of the signal that's received in this part of the audio spectrum. So what you do with this mode, like many of the other digital modes, is you set your rig dial at a certain frequency, and then you use the mechanisms in WSJTX to tune in the audio spectrum to decide which 47 hertz you're going to use. The waterfall window. It's also used for tuning. There's more than one way to tune. but these two markers indicate where I'm tuned. Okay, and the green, which you can barely see down, it's the lower one, is the receive, and the red is the transmit. Now down here, and I'm going to show you a blow-up of this window in a moment, you have a window that's telling you about everything that's going on in the band. So in this entire audio spectrum, all of the signals are decoded and displayed here. And then this window is just displaying what's happening at the tuned frequency. Okay, the frequency that's tuned with the green up here. Now you see colors in here. A green is the way it marks the station calling CQ by default. And there you can change some of these things with settings. A red is a station calling me, so it's found my call sign in the message. And yellow over here are the transmissions that I did. Okay, so let me blow this up a little bit more, and I'm going to blow up just this part in the next slide, so I know it's hard to read from where you guys are. But I wanted to show you some things here. I said that you transmit standard messages. The software automatically generates the standard messages and the signal report. So it analyzes the signal and computes a signal report. There are a couple of things that are going to be new to you JT65 and JT9 folks. There's a new checkbox called auto-seek for auto-sequence right here. If you check that box, then when you're in a QSO, it automatically goes to the next message in the usual QSO sequence without you having to do anything. The other one here is labeled call first. If you call CQ and you have this box checked, it will respond to the first call back to you that it decodes. So let me go ahead here and we'll show an actual QSO. This is a screenshot of that. So I called CQ and I had to do it twice before I got a response. Not too surprising, because by the time that a person has heard my CQ and decided they want to respond to it, it may be too late in his 15 seconds to get something that could be decoded. And in fact, I believe I saw his signal after this CQ, but there wasn't enough on the waterfall, but there wasn't enough of it to decode. But then he's got his rig set, so it'll do it again. And this time I got his answer. All right, so the first message, CQ, my call sign, FM18 is the Maidenhead grid square for me and probably for most of you. It's a geographic locator. If you are unfamiliar with it, just Google Maidenhead grid square and you'll find out all about it and be able to find yours and so on. So I'm advertising CQ and my location. He responds with my call sign, his call sign, and his grid square. And then I send him the signal report, and this is all happening automatically. So I set the thing to start calling CQ and just sat and watched this. All right. So I sent him -8, and then he sent me Roger -3. And then the next message is Roger, 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 okay, I got it. I hate that message. They shouldn't have used it, but I don't think, but they did. So, and then it didn't decode a response from him on a couple transmissions. It had to try 3 times before he sent 73, and then I sent 73, or my system sent 73 for me, and that was the end of the QSO. So that's what a regular QSO is like.
So would that take 45 seconds for the 3 non?
Yes. So each one of these guys, there was 15 seconds to send it. There was another 15 seconds in here while it was looking for a response. So here's 30 seconds between this and the response. Here's another 30 seconds gone by, and then here's 30 seconds, and then a response that was decoded. Okay, so you can tune a couple ways. Actually, let me go back here for just a second. There's one thing I should tell you. Anybody work Tonga this week? Okay, well, obviously an interesting DXCC, and obviously likely to cause a pileup, right? There are some stations that started with JT65, but Tonga was acting this way this week. We say, you know, all these messages, I don't need all that. So some DX stations will not answer you unless you call them with a signal report rather than your grid. So you just skip over the grid and you send them the signal report message. They respond with the signal report message. Then you say 73 and he goes on to the next guy. So watch for that behavior, especially with folks who are likely to think that they're going to cause a pileup.
You can tell the software to generate that message?
Yes. So the message is already there, and these buttons over here say, okay, transmit this message immediately, and these buttons say transmit it next. So you can use these controls to skip over messages, you know, if you encounter this kind of situation. Another thing I should tell you, well, you tune the rig to the standard frequency. You can click on a frequency in the waterfall window, and the behavior of that depends on how you have a checkbox set. There's a checkbox that says lock, transmit, and receive frequency. If that's checked, then clicking will move both. If it's not checked, then a click will move the receive frequency, and a shift click will move the transmit frequency. Now, the reason I'm telling you this story is another thing that's going on with DX stations likely to cause a pileup is you may want to work them cross-band, and they may ask you to work cross-band. There was one station in St. Pierre who was calling CQ up, all right, saying he's going to listen at a higher frequency. All right, so you have to unlock your transmit and receive, and you know, you move your transmit to any open frequency and you try calling in there. Otherwise, you know, maybe 5 stations zero BDM and call all at once, and then the chances that that's going to get decoded are pretty minimal. So that's certainly something to try, you know, if you're trying to work a station that you think is likely to you know, have lots of people calling him. If you double click a message in the left pane, so if you double click something over here, it'll tune that station and it'll generate the standard messages appropriate for working that station automatically, and turn your rig to transmit if you've got some of the settings set that way. Okay, so, all right. Now, there's an optional add-on. So this is going to be a third window. It does not come from the same folks. All right, so it has a different URL to download it called JT Alert. All right, and JT Alert chats with the window where WSJTX is reporting, you know, all of the stations, you know, in the received bandwidth in a given time period, and it looks up each one for you. Oops. In my case, using QRZ.com, figures out where he is. Also, it looks up, well, doesn't look up in my log, but periodically I tell it to scan my log, and it builds a wanted list. So this was on 40 meters when this was taken. I apparently don't have Japan on 40 meters, so that got colored yellow. These two that are green we're calling CQ. This bar over here says that he's on EQSL.cc, the electronic logging system, and a left bar means that somebody's on Logbook of the World. And sometimes I use that information, you know, when you get an opening, you know, maybe you haven't worked Slovenia and all of a sudden 2 or 3 pop up. Well, I like Logbook of the World, so I'm going to prefer the one with a bar on the left. All right, and this is also why I talked Ron into getting on Logbook of the World, because it's part of your persona. You know, people who like Logbook of the World are going to work somebody else ahead of you if they have that choice, if you're not on Logbook of the World, and this is how they'll know. Okay, so if you can work sideband, you can work digital. Okay, you do have to get some interfacing done. The interfacing for this mode is the same as other digital modes, and it varies by rig. But basically, you need to get audio out of the rig, and you need to get audio back into the rig so you can transmit and receive. The actual tones that are transmitted can be generated on a computer sound card, or there are lots of interfacing devices that you can buy that have sound cards built into them. After that little story, it tends to get rig specific. There are some good materials. I've given you one URL, or you know, put something on the reflector, ask somebody. You know, a lot of us have digital setups.